He's known for some really famous cartoons like What's Opera Doc and another.
Well, you know What's Opera Doc, I think, was the one that was named the greatest cartoon ever made. And Jerry Beck, a great animation historian, did a book, and he polled 1,000 animation professionals. Now, if you think about that, that's a lot of people in the animation world of many different generations and all over the place, and asked them to rank their top, I think they asked for the top 10 or top 20 from each of them of the cartoons, and it had to be 20 minutes or less in history. And so they compiled the top 50 cartoons, and of those top 50, Chuck had 10 out of the 50.
Wow.
Including number 1, number 2, number 4, and number 5. Number one being What's Opera Doc. Then there's a Duck Amuck. I think Scarlet Pumpernickel maybe in those top 4. And I'm losing the rest, but they're all in there. In fact,
One Froggy Evening.
Yes, One Froggy Evening. That's probably in number 3, 4, or 5, right in there. But and including the Dover Boys is I think number 48. So,
oh, cool.
Yes, it's quite the thing. But but also it's not just the animation professionals. The National Film Registry selected What's Opera Doc as the first animated cartoon to kind of that one gag. And you know, he said like in you know, well, whether it's an inspiration of bullfighting and that just becomes the gag, or it's something like the golfing one that I'm blanking on, but where Bugs is over in Scotland with McCrory. My bunny lies over the sea. Thank you. And yes, thank you. Good pull. But he said that there was the idea that this, you know, this man, the gag basically was that there's a man in a skirt, and that the bagpipes were this horrible monster. And so this monster was attacking this woman, and that Bugs, you know, again makes the wrong turn to Albuquerque and ends up in Scotland. So they put him in place there, but then he sees this bagpipe, which is, you know, really, unless you really appreciated it, it does sound like a monster coming out, and so then everything ensues with the golf and whatnot. So usually there's one gag, and then it just sort of percolates from there.
So can you talk a little bit about him? You know, what did he used to say about being joyful and about doing what you love? You know,
he. I think it came back when I heard him talking about that. It really was when he was talking about how grateful he was to be able to do what he loved to do pretty much his entire life, and that was to draw. That somebody was paying him, as he said, not a lot, not lavishly, but paying him to be comfortable to draw. That, as he said, was the greatest surprise of his life. You know, he came out of art school in 1929 at the ripe old age of 17.
Right.
So he went to a 3-year program at Chenard Art Institute, which is now Cal Arts, and these were really the finest artists. And this was a fine art school. There was no animation industry. There was no animation school, and he didn't even know what animation was back then when he started in 1917. And he was 15 years old when he started, and 17 when he ended, and he came out in 1929, and he thought he was, you know, this fine artist that would go to Europe and, you know, live in Paris and draw beautiful women and, you know, as he says, die at
skunks.
Yes, exactly. Die at a ripe old age of like 37, as he always talked about it. And but then 1929 was right at the beginning of the Depression, and he said it became very clear that it was going to take money to die poor. So, you know, to get there, he had to make some money. So he kind of wandered around for a year or two, trying to discover what he could do to make a living, and he drew caricatures on Alvera Street, which is a tourist destination down in Los Angeles, as he says, for $1 a piece. But then he stumbled into the animation business, and he said that pretty soon, although he was hired as a cell washer,
right?
I mean, truly, he was hired to destroy
and you worked for
the
Tex
cells.
Avery too.
Early on, he did. He was an animator, but he started off with iWorks and washing the cells that are so rare, but he was actually destroying them back then because it was cheaper to pay him
to wash them
off than it was to pay 8 cents for a new piece of celluloid back then. But very soon he was able to start drawing and became an assistant animator and then animator and then went into directing. But you know, to answer your question about his joy, he always, I think what he talked about being joyous was discovering what was new in every day. What was going to develop beyond something that was already done, either by him or by anybody else. Inside of everybody, there's that creative genius that at times it gets tapped into, and these wonderful ideas come exploding out. And I believe, and what I see is that along with that comes that joy rushing out with it. And so someone like Chuck, who just naturally lived in the moment all the time, and I think it was really the reason that people who met him fell in love with him instantly, because he was absolutely 100% there for them. Not about him, but about them for that moment. And I meet people from decades and decades ago who say that they met him for 5 minutes, yet the interaction changed their life. And that maybe there was a new direction. And so really, knowing that that's possible in the Center for Creativity, that within these programs, whether it's an hour or whether it's a 6-week or 12-week program, that there are these little moments of inspiration that come out, and with it there's that sort of electricity of joy that comes bursting upon. And you know, I know that that's what Chuck lived in, that constantly, and so there was sort of that play between, wow, this is exciting, and oh, there's another great idea, and oh, that's exciting, and oh, here we go again. And when people told him no, he would step back, and that wisdom inside him would say, hold on, hold on. And you know, one of the great examples of that was this cartoon. And he met Dr. Seuss when Ted Geisel in the war in the 1940s, and they were making training films together with Snafu. And so he and Ted were friends for years. And in the mid 60s, Chuck was looking for things at MGM to do, and so this book had been written in 1958. He thought, you know what, I could animate that. I could envision this as a story. And so he went to Ted and convinced him that he would do a good job at animating it. And then he went to the studio, and back then it wasn't just selling it to the studio. You had to have a sponsor. You had to come with money with the production. And Roger Mayer, who was the attorney from MGM who was working on it at the time, they went to the normal candidates, and Kellogg's wasn't interested, and all the regular family people weren't going to put up the money, because Chuck wanted a lot of money. He brought back the greatest animators, and at the time I think it was a $350,000 project, which is the most that
plus
anybody.
Sports car lot.
Well, that, and you know, he wanted all of these great things, and no one saw the return on it. And so Roger came to Chuck and said, you know what, there's no money. I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to do this. And Chuck said, don't worry about it, I'll find the money. And so he had done about 500 storyboards himself, color storyboards and MGM panels, and because he needed to illustrate this. And he did 25 presentations all over the country describing what it was. And he'd go out and not only show the things, he would do the voices, he would act out the entire story that he had already envisioned in his mind. And I think what Chuck knew is that if he could envision it, he could figure out how to get there. So he went out, and finally he went to Chicago, and he went to the Association of Commerce Banks and said, here it is. He did the presentation. They said, you know what, we get it. Tell you what, we'll give you the money. Which Chuck always thought was sort of ironic, because the entire story is about, you know, what Christmas is really, and, you know, not with presents and all the rest of the things. And here the banks are giving him the money. But he got Boris Karloff, and he got the great animators to come back, and he got June Foray to do Cindy Lou Who.
Oh, yeah.
And so
well, they're really all the best.
in the industry said, you can't do this. You know, it was a new world then, because Chuck's world was animated short subjects at that point. And he had done, this was really his first half-an-hour television special. And so to animate, he really knew how to do the short subjects, but there was no revenue model for that. Even back at Warner Brothers, there was no revenue model that said, okay, this was going out. The studios would pay for it, but
and it's
it
the
had to
same
go
time
out.
as the first other Christmas feature, which was the Charlie Brown Christmas
was the year before.
1966, so it's right around that, right?
So that was being done, and everybody knew that there was a new style and new things that were coming, but Chuck wouldn't do it inexpensively. Chuck decided that he wanted to do it, and it was the most expensive thing that had been proposed at that point.
You know, you touched upon before about the creativity and the joy, and then overcoming. I mean, really, the vision and the imagination that Chuck came up with, whether it be in one of the short subject cartoons with Marvin Martian or with the Grinch when he saw it. I mean, he saw every moment of that 23 minutes of animation, so he knew he could make it. And putting that all together, and I think you say, you know, someone should, but it's a matter of, the way that I see and the way that I saw Chuck live was that there was no other choice but to follow where that joy would take him. And so if he could find that joy, not from the result, because he said that, you know,
it's never the result.
It's not. You know, he'd take the Oscar and say thank you for it, but immediately was putting it back on the shelf and saying, okay, what's next? Because the journey is the most important thing. The results are here nor there.
Right.
It's great to get the accolades.
It's an after effect.
It is.
Of the thing that
the
is
journey
inspiration.
of finding that joy, and from that knowing that you're finding the genius, is really the way he refused to take any other turn, to not take that turn at Albuquerque.
If you want some originals of Chuck's, their family was nice enough to offer some originals for us to sell, so that's something you can check out too on artinsights.com. Thank you so much for watching, and stay creative, because obviously Chuck was all about creativity. Thanks.
Here, here. Well done.
Yes. Okay.